Eva, 32, was once just another face in the background, quietly pushed aside by the people who were supposed to have her back, her own siblings. After a life-changing crash left her physically shattered, she could have given up, but instead, she made a choice. She decided to rise, to rebuild herself from the ground up, not with explosions and dramatic takedowns, but with something far quieter. Her revenge wasn't about hurting them, it was about outgrowing them, becoming so much more successful than they could have ever imagined, and in the process, shutting the door on them for good. This isn't a story of revenge for revenge's sake, but about finding strength in solitude and proving that sometimes the best way to get even is to live well without them. Eva had always known she was different from her siblings. Her brother, Mark, was the firstborn, and in the world of their family, that meant something. He was everything their parents had hoped for: handsome, athletic, confident. People loved him without effort, and he always seemed to have the world at his feet. To their parents, he was the golden child, the one whose achievements were celebrated like milestones on a path to greatness. Everything he did was impressive: his popularity, his charm, his effortless ability to win at sports, to make friends. Even when he slipped up, which he did often, his mistakes were treated like harmless misadventures, not failures. It was a charm, a kind of magic he carried, and it was never questioned. He could do no wrong. That was Mark. Then there was Chloe, the youngest of the three. She came into the world 3 years after Eva, and by then, their family was already revolving around Mark. In a way, Chloe had no choice but to take her place as his follower. It wasn't necessarily that she lacked a voice, it's that she quickly learned the safest path in their family was to align herself with Mark. She became his echo, his shadow, always supporting him, always agreeing with him, always mirroring his opinions and likes. The bond between Mark and Chloe wasn't one of shared interest or deep emotional understanding, but of convenience. Chloe found it easier to gain attention and approval by siding with him. If Mark liked something, Chloe liked it too. If Mark had an opinion, Chloe would eagerly back it up, parroting his thoughts as though they were her own. Her identity, in many ways, was swallowed up by his. And it felt as though the two of them moved through life as a unit, with Eva quiet, bookish, and overlooked, sitting somewhere in the background, invisible. And then there was Eva, the middle child, the one who seemed to get lost in the shuffle. She wasn't as dazzling as Mark or as bubbly as Chloe. She wasn't the one who attracted attention when she entered a room. Instead, Eva was the quiet one, the observer, the one who was content with being in the background. She was the one who spent her time in her room, reading books or sketching in notebooks, losing herself in a world where she could be in control. It wasn't that she didn't try to stand out, but it was as if the spotlight simply never landed on her. She was just, there. Like the piece of furniture that everyone relies on, but no one thinks to acknowledge. Dependable, practical, reliable, and easily overlooked. In her family, she was the backdrop to Mark's shining star and Chloe's echo. It was clear that if she didn't make noise, if she didn't draw attention to herself, she would remain in the shadows. But that didn't make the neglect any easier to handle. It left a scar, one she would only truly understand later in life. There was a time when she thought maybe things could be different. Maybe if she did something really big, something amazing, she would finally be seen. So one summer, when she was about 10, she saved up her allowance and bought a model kit, a detailed castle with hundreds of tiny pieces, intricate towers, songs, and a working drawbridge. It was an ambitious project for a girl her age, but she was determined. She spent weeks meticulously building it, carefully putting the pieces together, making sure everything was perfect. When it was finished, she was incredibly proud of it. She placed it carefully on the coffee table in the living room, just waiting for her parents to come home and see the effort she'd put in. She was excited to share her achievement with them, hoping they'd acknowledge the hard work she'd invested into it. But Mark, as usual, didn't pay any attention. When he came home with his friend, the football in his hands, it wasn't long before chaos unfolded. Despite being told countless times not to play in the house, he and his friend started tossing the ball around in the living room. And then, the inevitable happened. The ball flew wide, hit the edge of the coffee table, and smashed into Eva's castle. The pieces scattered everywhere, some large, some small, all tumbling to the floor. Eva froze. She didn't scream. She just stood there, a deep, cold weight settling in her stomach as she stared at the destruction. Mark, looking barely at her, simply shrugged. "It's just a toy. Eva, relax," he said, as if the value of all her hard work, her pride in the model, her effort, her time meant nothing. Chloe, who had been watching the whole thing, immediately jumped in. "Yeah, Eva, it was an accident. Don't be such a tattletale." Just like that, Eva's feelings were dismissed, her frustration ignored. And when their parents got home, it was the same story. The whole thing was brushed aside as a simple accident, and Eva was the one made to feel like she was overreacting. She was told to clean up the mess, and no one even offered to help look for the scattered pieces. Eva spent hours on her hands and knees, trying to gather the broken bits of her castle. But it wasn't just the pieces of the toy that she was picking up. It was also the pieces of her self-worth that were quietly crumbling in the process. This incident, in a way, became a symbol of Eva's place in the family. Her hard work, her dedication, her quiet achievements were always disregarded, always treated as less important than whatever Mark was doing, whatever Chloe was supporting. It wasn't the last time that Eva would feel invisible. Years later, when she was 16, her family dynamic hadn't changed. In fact, it had only solidified. Eva had developed a passion for science. She wasn't the type to follow the crowd. She found solace in experiments, in data, in the precision of numbers. She decided to work on a science fair project, an environmental study on the local river's water quality. She worked for months, collecting water samples, running tests, and writing up her findings. She poured herself into it, crafting every detail with care, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this would be the thing that would make her stand out, that would make her family see her. The night before the science fair, Eva had everything set up in the garage. Her project was laid out on a table, ready to be transported the next morning. But of course, Mark had other plans. He was throwing a party at the house, and despite being told to keep it contained, the chaos spread beyond the backyard. As the night went on, no one knew who decided to open a can of spray paint to graffiti a skateboard. A gust of wind blew the fine mist of blue paint right onto Eva's project, ruining half of her charts and graphs. When Eva found it, she was crushed. She ran inside, hoping that someone would understand. Instead, Mark was standing in a circle with his friends, holding a drink. When she confronted him, he barely looked at her, a bored tone in his voice. "What do you want me to do about it?" he asked, his words like daggers. "It's just some paint. Scrape it off." And then Chloe, ever the loyal follower, joined in. "Oh my gosh, Eva, you're going to ruin Mark's party over this. It's not a big deal." And just like that, her work, her passion, was dismissed again. Her frustration was seen as an inconvenience, not just to Mark, but to the entire family. When their parents found out the next day, they sighed with exasperation. They were more concerned with the mess in the garage than with the fact that Eva's hard work had been destroyed. Mark received a lecture so mild it could have been mistaken for a suggestion, and Eva was left to salvage what was left of her project. She ended up with an honorable mention at the science fair, but she couldn't help but wonder what could have been. The bitterness of that moment stayed with her. It wasn't just about the projects or the toys. It was the feeling that no matter what she did, no matter how hard she worked, she would always be the third wheel, the one who was just there, taking up space but never truly being final. Mark and Chloe's lives were always front and center, always celebrated. Eva's existence, however, was just a quiet background noise, easily ignored, easily dismissed. The pain of being overlooked in a family that was supposed to love and support her was something that would stay with her forever. As Eva grew older, the neglect, both emotional and physical, only deepened, becoming more insidious as the years went on. The family dynamics had become entrenched, and with every passing year, she was more and more erased from the picture. Mark's career, Chloe's social life, their victories, their goals, these were the things that mattered. As for Eva, well, she was just a backdrop, a silent observer to the life that was unfolding around her, always second to their needs, always last in line for recognition. The incident with the science fair was only the beginning of a series of painful moments. But it wasn't just the blatant dismissals that left a mark. It was the subtle ways she was made to feel invisible. For years, Eva's accomplishments were always overshadowed by her siblings' louder, more socially acceptable achievements. It wasn't just about who got the better grades or who had the more successful career. It was the way the family treated her success as insignificant, as though she was just a placeholder in the story of their lives, a role that didn't really matter. Her parents never failed to remind her of Mark's achievements. They couldn't help but recount his victories, his athletic prowess, his charm, and his popularity. At family gatherings, it was always Mark's latest triumphs that were highlighted, while Eva sat there quietly, hoping for even a fraction of the recognition. It wasn't that her parents were bad people, they loved her in their own way, but it was always with a certain distance, like she was a convenient prop in their lives rather than a true presence. And Chloe was so intertwined with Mark that she rarely noticed Eva's pain. If Mark was the hero of the family, then Chloe was his devoted sidekick. She was always there to echo Mark's opinions, to reinforce the narrative that Mark was the one worth celebrating, but it wasn't just her family who treated her this way. The outside world often mirrored the same neglect. Eva was often overlooked, passed over for opportunities, ignored in social situations. She had learned early on not to expect much. There was no loud applause, no fanfare for her achievements. She was always the one who would step back, who would let others take the spotlight. Even in school, her accomplishments were quietly dismissed or overshadowed by someone else's success. Mark was the one who got the praise for excelling in sports. Chloe was the one who got the attention for being fun and charming. Eva was, as always, the one who just kept to herself, hoping for recognition that would never come. Her emotional neglect wasn't limited to her siblings and parents. It was woven into every facet of her life. She would try to seek validation through her work, through her studies, but even there, she was often dismissed. It was as if her worth was always tied to someone else's opinion of her, never her own. She wasn't allowed to just be herself. She had to be compared to Mark or Chloe, and with each comparison, the gap between them seemed wider, their achievements more dazzling, while hers were quietly tucked away. Her success, when it did come, was never celebrated the way it should have been. It was always, "Oh, that's nice, Ava," and then the conversation would quickly shift back to Mark's latest promotion or Chloe's new social circle. And it wasn't just about the emotional neglect. There was also the physical neglect. The moment her accident happened, it was as though her body, too, became something to be overlooked, something that could be ignored until it became a problem. When the crash occurred, Ava's life, as she knew it, shattered in an instant. The accident left her with a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and a leg so badly shattered it required complex surgery. She was barely able to move, let alone care for herself. Yet, in the weeks that followed, Eva noticed the absence of the support she expected. Her parents, of course, came to visit, but they had their own lives to manage. They weren't there every day. They had their worries about their own health, about Mark's career, and Chloe's social life. Eva's recovery was an afterthought, something that could be put off until the weekend. Her parents, as concerned as they were, couldn't provide the kind of emotional or physical support she needed. Mark and Chloe's visits were sparse, and when they did show up, it was clear they were just checking off a box. They brought flowers and magazines, gestures that, while kind in theory, didn't quite capture the gravity of the situation. They were more concerned with their own inconveniences than with Eva's suffering. Mark was already focused on his next big sales quarter. Chloe was preoccupied with her social media collaborations, and neither of them seemed capable of seeing the gravity of what had happened to her. They weren't angry or cruel, but they were indifferent, and that indifference stung more than anything else. When they did visit, it was as though they were more concerned with escaping the hospital room than with her actual well-being. Mark would make excuses about how busy his job was, while Chloe would mention her brunch plans or how she needed to get back to a friend's party. Even when Eva's recovery was clearly going to take months, they didn't seem to grasp the reality of the situation. The emotional neglect grew harder to ignore as Eva's recovery continued. Her parents, despite their occasional visits, seemed to grow more and more distant. They had their own concerns: Mark's career, Chloe's social life, and Eva was just left in the background. The final straw came when it was decided she would be moved from the hospital to a rehabilitation facility. This marked the moment when Eva realized just how invisible she had become. Her parents, who had always been present in the background of her life, now seemed to treat her like an inconvenience. They were overwhelmed by their own lives, and the promise to visit every weekend was made. But it quickly became apparent that this was nothing more than a routine gesture. Mark and Chloe were less concerned with her recovery and more concerned with how much of their time it would take. The idea of her being in a facility for months, possibly a year or more, was just too much. They made it clear that they didn't want to put their lives on hold for her. Even though she had been the one whose life had been turned upside down, they were too busy, too important. The weight of that message was impossible to ignore. Eva realized then that she wasn't just a family member to them. She was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience that needed to be dealt with. This was the moment when Eva's emotional neglect crossed into the realm of abandonment. Her family wasn't just failing to care for her, they were actively turning away. Her parents made it clear that they couldn't handle the responsibility. And Mark and Chloe, her siblings, the people who should have been there for her, had already moved on. This pattern of neglect didn't just hurt, it was damaging, deep-rooted, and systemic. It was the final confirmation that, in the eyes of her family, she was expendable. The message was loud and clear: Eva was not important. Her needs were secondary. Her success didn't matter. Her pain didn't matter. When the doctors told Eva she would be moving to a rehab facility, it should have been a turning point. But instead, it was just another moment where her family's neglect became undeniable. The realization that she couldn't count on them to be there for her, to help her through the most difficult time of her life, left a scar that would never fully heal. They were too busy with their own lives, their own concerns. Eva, once again, was left to fend for herself, physically and emotionally. The path that had led to the crash was the same path that would lead her to the realization that her family would never be the support she needed. They had already decided she was someone they could live without. This pattern of emotional neglect was what eventually fueled Eva's determination. It wasn't just about proving herself to her family, though that was part of it. It was about proving to herself that she was more than the sum of their disregard. It was about reclaiming the parts of her life that had been stolen, the recognition, the love, the sense of belonging. The neglect she had endured over the years became the fuel for her fire. And it was in those moments of isolation, of being ignored and discarded, that Eva found the strength to rebuild herself. Her revenge wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was silent, patient, and filled with the quiet resilience of someone who had learned that sometimes the best way to fight back is to rise above. She would never need their approval again. Her success would come not from their validation, but from her own strength and determination. And in the process, she would leave them all behind, a silent testament to her quiet defiance. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that feels like everything is in its place, bright, sunny, and almost impossibly perfect. Eva had just finished a promising job interview at a small software company, feeling a rare spark of optimism. She was confident that things were finally starting to align for her. She had spent the drive there and back, thinking about the coding test they had asked her to complete, feeling hopeful for the future. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was the first real opportunity that made her feel like she was about to step into something bigger, something meaningful. But that day would never be remembered for any of that. Eva was on her way home, humming along to the radio, the music faintly filling the car as the sun streamed through the windshield. She was stopped at a red light, mind already racing with ideas for the upcoming coding project. When it all happened, it felt like a single moment stretched into eternity. The screech of tires was the first sound she heard, loud, sharp, out of place. It was followed by the deafening crash of metal against metal, a sound that didn't seem real. A truck, driven by someone who had fallen asleep at the wheel, slammed into the back of the car directly behind her. The impact set off a chain reaction, pushing that car into another. And before Eva could even process what was happening, her own car was struck from behind with such force that the world seemed to collapse around her. The seatbelt locked her in place, but nothing could stop the immense pressure. Her body was shoved forward, her head hitting the steering wheel, and then everything went black. When she regained consciousness, it wasn't the soft sound of familiar voices calling her name that greeted her, but the mechanical hum of machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the cold reality of hospital lights. Her body felt foreign, disconnected. She could barely move, and the pain, it was like nothing she had ever felt before. Her head throbbed, and she could feel the sharp sting of pain with every breath. When she finally managed to open her eyes, all she could see were the blurs of doctors and nurses bustling around her, their voices muffled, their faces almost unrecognizable. The doctors told her the extent of the damage: a severe concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and her leg shattered in several places. The prognosis was unclear surgery, long-term rehabilitation, and an uncertain future. But in that moment, as she tried to piece together what had just happened, the gravity of her situation barely registered. She could only focus on the excruciating pain, the confusion, and the overwhelming feeling of being completely alone. Her parents arrived a few hours later. Eva was barely able to speak, her words slurred and weak. They rushed to her side, their faces filled with concern, but Eva couldn't shake the feeling that their worry was almost distant. Their reactions weren't unkind, but it felt as though they were performing their parental duties more out of obligation than genuine care. They were visibly upset. Of course, her father's brow furrowed, her mother's eyes wide with worry, but there was an unsettling emptiness to their concern, as though this was an event they were going through the motions of handling. It wasn't until later that night, when her siblings arrived, that the depth of their indifference hit her with full force. Mark was the first to show up, her older brother, the golden child of the family. Mark, the handsome, confident, and effortlessly successful one, who always seemed to command attention with a flick of his hand and a flash of that winning smile. He strolled into her room looking perfectly put together, his clothes pressed, his hair styled. The contrast between his pristine appearance and Eva's broken body felt like a punch to the gut. He looked at her, really looked at her, but only for a moment. He then glanced around the room, as though assessing her like an object in need of repair. He didn't seem to notice the depth of her injury or the weight of what had just happened to her. His words were almost casual. "Wow, Eva," he said with a slight laugh, as if he were commenting on an old car breaking down. "You really did a number on yourself." He said it in that tone, distant, detached, as though it were a passing observation rather than a moment of genuine concern. Eva wanted to scream at him, but she couldn't even move. She just stared, feeling the sting of his words sink deep inside her. The person she had always looked up to, the person who had always been the center of their family, had just dismissed her suffering like it was an inconvenience. His voice was devoid of empathy. It wasn't just that he didn't care, it was that he couldn't be bothered to care. Chloe, her younger sister, arrived soon after. Eva could barely hold her eyes open. But when Chloe stepped into the room, she tried to focus. Her younger sister's wide, almost exaggerated look of concern felt fake. Chloe, who had always idolized Mark, had adopted his mannerisms over the years. She was his echo, his shadow. She had no identity beyond supporting him. And that night, her concern for Eva was nothing more than a performance. She clutched her phone in her hand, eyes flicking to it nervously as she stood in the doorway, offering only a week. "This is just awful." Before her gaze darted around the room, the worst part came when Chloe added, "I had to cancel my salon appointment." The words were barely out of her mouth before she was already looking away. As though embarrassed by her own triviality, Eva wanted to cry. She was in a hospital bed, barely able to move, her body wrecked. And Chloe's first concern was a missed appointment. It felt like the final confirmation that Eva wasn't important enough for them to even care. Their lives, their priorities, those always came first. Eva was just something to check off the list, just another family member whose needs could be ignored. As the days wore on, her siblings' responses became increasingly dismissive. Mark, despite his earlier show of concern, never stayed long. He would come in, stand at the foot of her bed for a few minutes, and then make some excuse to leave. "I'd love to stay longer. Eva B," he'd say. "But you know how it is. This deal is huge. The pressure is on." The pressure he was referring to was his work, his career. Eva couldn't help but feel the weight of his words as they lingered in the air. He wasn't concerned about her recovery. He was concerned about his own problems, his own success. Chloe was even worse. She rarely came by at all. When she did, her attention was elsewhere, on her phone, on her plans, on anything but Eva. She would give vague promises about coming back later, but those promises were always empty. She would sit for a few minutes, but the effort was half-hearted at best. She didn't care enough to show up, let alone offer any real support. The only time she really visited was when it was convenient for her, just enough to tell their parents she'd been there, but not enough to make a difference. Eva's parents, too, were barely there in the ways that mattered. They promised to visit every weekend, but those visits were increasingly strained. They were full of conversations about Mark's career and Chloe's social life. The more time passed, the more it felt like they were just going through the motions. They had their own lives to live, and they weren't going to let Eva's accident get in the way of that. Eva's needs were secondary. They weren't cruel, they weren't intentionally neglectful, but their actions spoke volumes. Her pain was just something they had to manage, not something they needed to understand or feel. The real turning point came when the doctors told Eva that she would need to be moved to a rehabilitation facility. That's when the full weight of the situation became clear. Her family wasn't just distant, they were actively abandoning her. Mark, when he heard the news, let out a long sigh as though the inconvenience of it all were too much to bear. "Look, this is a long-term thing," he said. "I've got my job. I can't just drop everything and drive back and forth all the time." The words, though soft, were sharp in their indifference. Eva wasn't a person to him. She was a problem, an inconvenience. His boss was asking questions about his family life, and that was the real crisis. His sister, she was just a casualty of his own busy life. Chloe, for her part, didn't offer anything more than a quick "I'll try to come by tomorrow," a promise that Eva knew was as empty as all the others. She wasn't coming, not really, not with any intention of offering the support that Eva so desperately needed. It was in that moment, hearing her brother talk about his own life, hearing Chloe's hollow promises, watching her parents fret about their own responsibilities, that Eva finally understood. She wasn't just in a hospital bed recovering from an accident. She was abandoned. She was being treated as a burden. Her family didn't care about her well-being. They cared about how her injury was affecting them, how it interfered with their lives. And that, more than anything else, was what broke her. Not the crash, not the broken bones or the shattered dreams, but the abandonment. The realization that the people she thought would be there for her were the ones who turned their backs the moment it became inconvenient. That was the moment when Eva realized she would have to rebuild everything, not just her body, but her life. And she would do it without them. Because if they couldn't be there for her now, they never would be. And that's when she began the quiet revenge. She wasn't going to waste any more time waiting for people who had already walked away. She was going to build her own life on her own terms. And she was going to make it so great that they would never be able to touch it again. The transition from the hospital to the rehabilitation facility wasn't just a physical move for Eva. It was a shift in her entire understanding of the world she had known. She was no longer just recovering from a traumatic accident. She was beginning to see the full extent of her abandonment. Not as a series of unfortunate events, but as a conscious choice made by the very people who should have been there to support her. Her family, those who she had always relied on, had long since made the decision that her suffering was not worth their time. At first, the loneliness was unbearable. In the hospital, she could almost understand the detachment, the awkwardness of dealing with her injuries. But the rehab facility, that was the moment when the absence of her family became crystal clear. It was no longer neglect, it was a deliberate choice. They had chosen to move on with their lives, to leave her behind in that sterile room, surrounded by strangers. The visits that were promised once a week dwindled to nothing. The calls became infrequent, reduced to generic texts or short, meaningless conversations that lacked any real emotion. Mark's excuses, his sales meetings, his promotions felt like walls she couldn't get past. Chloe's distractions with her social media or her influencer persona became laughable in comparison to the struggle Eva faced every day. In that facility, Eva felt the weight of her family's absence pressed down on her like a physical force. It was as though her pain, her struggle, was no longer worth their time. The guilt they might have felt at first had long since faded, replaced by the reality that they had more important things to worry about. She was a casualty of their lives, a side note they had decided didn't need to be part of the story anymore. But the absence, while crushing, didn't break Eva. It did something else, something unexpected. It gave her clarity. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking for validation from anyone. She wasn't waiting for her family's approval. They had already made it clear they didn't want to be part of her journey. So, Eva decided to make her own path. She started to rebuild her life on her own terms, away from the shadows of her siblings' success, away from the well-meaning but ultimately empty promises of her parents. The first few months in rehab were brutal. Every movement felt like an eternity. Her body, once strong and capable, was now a prisoner of broken bones and damaged muscles. The pain was relentless, a constant reminder of the crash. But it wasn't just the physical pain that tore at her, it was the emotional weight of knowing that the people who should have been there for her were nowhere to be found. Her leg, still swollen and bruised, refused to bend the way it used to. Every step was a battle, each exercise a mountain to climb, but slowly, painfully, she started to make progress. That's when David came into the picture. David was her physical therapist, assigned to work with her during the most challenging part of her recovery. He wasn't like the others, the doctors who had come in and out of her life, offering diagnoses and medical terms without ever really looking at her. David was different. He didn't treat her like an injury or a diagnosis. He saw her as a person who had been through something unimaginable, but who was still there, still fighting. At first, Eva resented him. She didn't want another person telling her what to do, another stranger prodding at her broken body. She wanted to be left alone, to heal in her own way, to process her pain in silence. But David wasn't like the others. He didn't push her too hard, but he didn't let her off the hook either. He knew when to be firm and when to give her space. And slowly, Eva began to trust him. His patience, his quiet strength, became the anchor she never knew she needed. David had a way of speaking to her, not as a victim, but as a survivor. He didn't sugarcoat the reality of her situation. He knew how hard the recovery would be, how long it would take. But he also knew that Eva had something within her that she wasn't tapping into yet. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had driven her to excel in the past, the same fire that was slowly starting to rise again as she fought her way back from the edge. "I know you're in pain," David would say, his voice steady. "But you can do this. Every step you take, no matter how small, is a victory. Don't let the pain define you. You define the pain." At first, Eva didn't understand what he meant. How could she define something that was taking so much from her? But as the days passed, and the pain started to ease just a little, she began to understand. Each day she made it through, each step she took was her choice. She could either let the crash destroy her, or she could choose to rise above it. The road wasn't easy. There were days when she didn't think she could keep going, when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. But with David's encouragement, she began to see the small victories. It wasn't just about the physical therapy anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, about taking control in ways she hadn't before. David had opened her eyes to the idea that this painful, grueling journey could be the turning point she had been waiting for. She wasn't just healing her body, she was healing her spirit, her sense of self-worth. As Eva grew stronger, physically and emotionally, something inside her began to shift. The idea of moving forward, of building something new, began to take shape. She had always been a quiet observer, content to watch others take the spotlight while she kept to the background. But now she wanted more. She wasn't content to stay in the shadows any longer. The fire that had once burned within her, the passion for technology and problem solving, began to reignite. She could feel the stirrings of a new purpose, something that wasn't defined by her family's expectations or her previous life. One afternoon, while she was working on her exercises in her room, the idea came to her like a flash of clarity. What if she could use her experience to help others like her? What if there was a way to combine her love for technology with her newfound understanding of rehabilitation? The idea for an app began to form a tool that would help people with physical disabilities, people recovering from injuries, stay motivated and track their progress during physical therapy. Eva's mind began to race with possibilities. She had always been a problem solver, and now she had a real problem to solve. She could create an app that would provide feedback on exercises, track improvements, and even connect patients with their therapists remotely. It would be something that didn't just help with the physical recovery, but also addressed the emotional side of healing, something that motivated people, something that gave them a reason to keep going, even when the pain seemed unbearable. It was an idea born from her own experience, from the isolation and frustration she had felt during her recovery. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how important it was. There were so many people who faced similar struggles, people who didn't have the support or motivation they needed to keep going. This could be her way of helping others, of creating something that could change lives, just as David had changed hers by helping her believe in herself again. The next step was clear. Eva had to learn how to build the app. She had a background in computer science, but building an app from scratch was a new challenge. At first, it felt overwhelming, like the mountain was too steep to climb. But she was used to fighting, used to taking small steps. So she started where she could. She began coding, teaching herself the ins and outs of app development, using the same grit and determination that had seen her through the worst of her physical recovery. Each line of code she wrote was a small victory. Each problem she solved, a step forward. As the weeks went by, the app took shape. David, who had become her closest ally, was there every step of the way. He believed in her even when she doubted herself. And he became the first beta tester for the app, offering invaluable feedback from a therapist's perspective. Together, they created something that could help countless people, something that was not just about rehabilitation, but about empowerment. It wasn't just about getting better physically, it was about regaining control over your own life. By the time Eva was ready to leave the rehab facility, the app was no longer just an idea. It was a fully functional prototype, something that could change the way people approached their recovery. And as she left the facility behind, she felt something new rise within her hope. Not the fragile, fleeting hope she had clung to in the past, but a strong, unshakable belief that she could not only heal herself, but she could help others heal too. David was there for her, not just as a therapist, but as a partner in this new venture. They had become more than just patient and therapist. They had become friends, allies, co-creators. The road ahead would still be challenging, but Eva was no longer the person who had been abandoned by her family. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had chosen to rebuild her life on her own terms. The fire that had once burned low was now ablaze. She wasn't just recovering from an accident, she was forging a future that was entirely her own, one step at a time. As the months passed in the rehab facility, Eva's body began to heal, but her mind was still heavy with the weight of her isolation. Every day was a battle, not just against her injuries, but against the overwhelming sense that she had been discarded, overlooked, left behind by the people who should have been there for her. Her family's absence, while physically distant, was always present in her mind, a constant reminder that she had to do this on her own. And that thought, that loneliness, slowly began to shift from pain into something else. One evening, as she sat in her small room, the light from the window casting long shadows on the walls, the idea came to her. She had been scrolling through her phone, looking at recovery tips, reading about different physical therapy exercises. When it hit her, what if there was a way to make physical therapy more accessible, more engaging? What if there was an app, something that could guide people through their exercises, track their progress, offer real-time feedback, and give them the motivation to keep going even when it felt impossible? The thought was almost surreal. It was a spark, something that felt too big to be real, too ambitious for someone who was still learning how to walk again. But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She had always been a problem solver, someone who could take a challenge and break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. She knew how difficult recovery could be, how isolating it felt to struggle through every step, every movement, without someone to guide you. She had felt that way for months alone in her pain, struggling to keep up, never knowing if she was doing things right. But what if there was a way to change that? What if she could create something that would help others just like her, find a way to heal with confidence, with guidance, and with a sense of purpose? Eva felt a flicker of excitement deep inside her, a light that had been dim for so long, but still somehow managed to survive. The idea was there, clear in her mind, an app that would combine her experience with physical therapy and her background in technology. It would use motion tracking to provide real-time feedback on exercises, making sure that the form was correct, that the user was pushing themselves but not overdoing it. It would track progress, provide rewards for consistency, and even allow users to connect with their therapists remotely. It was an idea born from her own frustration, from the hours she had spent wondering if she was doing her exercises right, from the pain of feeling disconnected from everyone around her. But even as the idea bloomed in her mind, doubt crept in. Could she really do this? She wasn't a tech mogul, she wasn't an entrepreneur. She was just a girl who had been broken, discarded, and forgotten. What did she know about building an app? The world of startups, of innovation. It seemed so far out of her reach. She had no money to invest, no network to call on, no team behind her. She was alone, stuck in a rehabilitation center, trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered in an instant. But that's when the shift happened. Eva began to understand something fundamental. She didn't need anyone else to build this. She didn't need her family's approval or validation. The very reason she had been discarded, overlooked, left behind, those things were now her strength. She was doing this for herself, not for anyone else. She didn't need their support, their praise, their understanding. She had everything she needed inside her: determination, resilience, and the drive to prove that she could rise from the ashes of her own pain. At first, the process felt slow, frustrating, even impossible. Eva had been through so much already. Her body was still recovering, still fragile, and the thought of tackling something as big as an app felt like too much. But she couldn't let the fear stop her. If she had learned anything from her time in rehab, it was that small steps led to progress. Just like in physical therapy, where every inch of movement mattered, every line of code, every feature, every small accomplishment would eventually build into something bigger. She had to take it one step at a time. The first obstacle was simple: she needed a laptop. The rehab center didn't exactly cater to tech development, but Eva was resourceful. She talked to her therapist, David, who had become her closest ally during the long months of recovery. He had seen her struggle, seen her determination, and he supported her idea, even when she doubted it herself. David had been there when she could barely lift her leg, when she couldn't even sit up without help. He had seen her at her lowest, and now he saw her beginning to rise. He was the one who made it happen. He gave her an old laptop of his, slow and clunky, but enough to get started. With that laptop in hand, Eva began to teach herself everything she could about app development. She spent hours every day watching tutorials, reading articles, and experimenting with code. The first few days were frustrating. She had forgotten so much about coding during her time away from it. She felt like a beginner all over again, unsure of where to start, unsure if she was even doing things right. Every bug, every error message felt like a failure. But there was no giving up. She couldn't afford to stop now. She had found something worth fighting for, and she was going to see it through, no matter how long it took. Slowly, the pieces began to come together. The app started to take shape. At first, It was just a simple prototype, basic tracking of exercises, a way to monitor progress, and some simple animations to show users how to perform each move. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The idea was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a reality, one line of code at a time. David was there to help in any way he could. He became her first beta tester, offering feedback from a therapist's perspective. He tested the app with some of his other patients, getting their input on how useful it was, what needed to be improved, what felt lacking. His support, both technical and emotional, was invaluable. David had always seen something in Eva that she hadn't seen in herself. He believed in her long before she started to believe in herself. And his belief in her idea fueled her own. Every time she hit a roadblock, every time the frustration threatened to overwhelm her, she remembered the way David had stood by her, the way he had encouraged her to keep going, even when she doubted herself. As the weeks passed, Eva's confidence grew. With each new feature she added to the app, with each new line of code that worked perfectly, she could feel her old self starting to emerge. This wasn't just about building an app, it was about reclaiming her life, her purpose, her drive. The quiet, patient determination that had kept her going through rehab was now fueling something bigger, something more meaningful. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building something. She was creating something that would help people, real people, people who, like her, were struggling to regain control over their lives. It wasn't just a physical therapy app. It was a lifeline. It was a tool for healing, for empowerment, for hope. But even with all the progress she had made, self-doubt still lingered. Every time the app worked, every time she saw the progress she was making, the question would pop into her mind: who are you to think you can do this? She was a girl with a broken body, a shattered past, and no resources. The world of tech seemed so far beyond her, so out of reach. She wasn't a businesswoman, she wasn't a startup guru. She was just Eva, trying to rebuild from the rubble of her own life. But something inside her pushed those thoughts aside. The more she worked, the more she realized that it didn't matter who she had been before. What mattered was who she was becoming. And this app, this project, was proof that she was capable of so much more than she had ever believed. It wasn't just about the app anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could rise above the pain, above the neglect, above the brokenness. With each new step, Eva started to believe in herself more. The app wasn't just a way to help others, it was a way to help herself, too. It was a testament to her resilience, her refusal to stay broken, her determination to make something meaningful out of the pieces of her life. She wasn't just a victim of her past anymore. She was the architect of her own future. And that future, it was just beginning. The first signs of hope had sprouted from the ashes of her frustration. She was no longer defined by her pain. She was defined by the strength she had found in herself. The strength to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. She was on her way to creating something that would change lives. And in the process, she was changing her own life too, one line of code at a time. As the years passed, Eva's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. Phoenix, the app she had created during her time in rehabilitation, had evolved from a simple idea into a fully functional product that was gaining traction. The app was designed to help people recovering from injuries, to give them motivation and guidance through their physical therapy journeys. It was a tool that people were using, a product that was truly making a difference. And it wasn't just an app anymore, it had grown into a full-fledged company. Eva was no longer just a broken woman rebuilding herself. She was the CEO of a tech startup, leading a small team of developers and creating something that could change the way people approach their recovery. It wasn't easy. Of course, Every day felt like a battle against self-doubt, against the imposter syndrome that told her she didn't belong in this world of startups and investors. But the more she worked, the more the company grew. She hired employees, secured funding, and began expanding Phoenix into new markets. Each small victory felt like a quiet declaration to herself she had made it. The success wasn't just professional, it was personal, too. Eva had become a woman who wasn't defined by her family's neglect, by her past failures, or by the scars left from the crash. She was becoming someone entirely new, someone capable, someone powerful, someone who could hold her own in a world that had once seemed out of reach. She was building a life for herself, a life where her achievements were recognized, where her worth wasn't tied to the expectations of others, and where she didn't have to prove herself to anyone. It was the life she had always dreamed of, even though she had never truly believed it was possible. But while Eva was climbing the ladder of success, her family remained in the background, oblivious to her achievements. They had long since stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped caring about her progress. The silence from them had been deafening, but over time, Eva had learned to live with it. She had built a life without them, and for the most part, that had been enough. She had learned to stop waiting for them to acknowledge her, to stop hoping that one day they would see her as something more than the person they had abandoned. Then, one day, out of nowhere, she received a message. It was from Chloe, after years of radio silence. There, it was a text from her younger sister. The message was short, just a few words. I saw your article, Eva. Amazing work. We should talk. Eva stared at the screen, the words almost surreal in their simplicity. Chloe, the sister who had once been so tied to Mark, so wrapped up in her own social media persona, was suddenly reaching out. It was as if their absence from her life had been nothing more than a fleeting moment, a bump in the road. But it wasn't just Chloe who reached out. Mark followed soon after, sending a text that was almost eerily enthusiastic. Hey, Eva, I saw you've been killing it with that Phoenix thing. We need to catch up. I'm really proud of you. Let's grab dinner soon. The words stung. They were exactly what Eva had feared, shallow, empty praise designed to cover up the years of neglect. There was no genuine interest in her life, no curiosity about her journey. They had no idea what it had taken for her to get to this point, no understanding of the struggle, the pain, the self-doubt. All they saw was the success. All they saw was the finished product. Eva was torn. Part of her wanted to respond, wanted to finally have the conversation she had imagined 1,000 times, the one where she could finally confront them, make them see the weight of their abandonment. But another part of her, the part that had grown over the past few years, knew that this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about them wanting something from her, not about them actually caring. They didn't want to reconnect with her because they missed her. They wanted to reconnect because they saw the success she had built, the empire she had created out of nothing. And they wanted a piece of it. They wanted to be a part of her story now that it was worth something. It wasn't just a call for dinner. It was a call for validation. They wanted to be able to say, look, that's our sister. We've always known she had it in her. They wanted to rewrite the narrative, to position themselves as the supportive family members, as if their years of silence had never happened, as if they had been there all along, cheering her on from the sidelines. But Eva wasn't fooled. She had seen this pattern before. She had lived through the years of silence, the years when her achievements meant nothing to them, when her struggles were dismissed as unimportant, as inconveniences in their busy lives. Now, suddenly, they wanted to be a part of her success. They wanted to capitalize on her hard work, her sacrifice. Eva reflected on the years they had spent walking away from her, leaving her to fend for herself. to build a life that they had never acknowledged. And now, when the life she had built was something to be proud of, they wanted to step back into the picture, as though they had always been there. Their reappearance wasn't about love or family. It was about opportunism. It was about them seeing an opening to share in her success, to benefit from the work she had done alone, without them. They wanted to ride the wave of her accomplishment, but they had no interest in the struggle, the pain, or the journey that had gotten her here. The anger that Eva had pushed aside for so long began to resurface. She realized that, despite her success, despite the life she had built, a part of her still longed for the approval of her family. But that longing was starting to fade, replaced by a deep sense of self-respect and a new understanding of what it meant to be truly independent. She didn't need them to validate her. She didn't need their approval. She had already built everything she needed on her own, for herself. Eva thought long and hard about how to respond. A part of her wanted to lash out, to tell them exactly what she thought of their sudden reappearance, to remind them of how they had left her behind when she needed them most. But then another part of her, the woman she had become over the last few years, knew better. She didn't need to prove anything to them. She didn't need to explain her success, to make them understand what it had taken for her to get to this point. She didn't owe them an explanation. What she owed herself was closure, and that was exactly what she planned to give them. So she sent a simple message back. "Thank you for the message. It's good to hear from you, but I'm doing fine. My life has changed, and I've moved on from the past. I wish you both the best." It was polite, but firm. It was the closure she needed. There would be no reunion. There would be no reopening of old wounds. The door, once left ajar, was now firmly closed. And in that moment, as she hit send, Eva realized something. She wasn't just moving forward with her business. She was moving forward with her life. She was no longer the person she had been before. She was the person she had chosen to become. And she didn't need anyone's approval to feel proud of the life she had built. The door to her past had closed, and with it, the weight of her family's abandonment was finally lifted. Phoenix was her future now, and no one was going to take that from her. The day of the dinner came, and Eva was ready. She had known this moment was inevitable, that it would come sooner or later, but it didn't make the emotions any easier to navigate. She had spent years trying to forget the pain, trying to move past the betrayal, but there was always a part of her that wondered if there was still something to salvage from her relationship with Mark and Chloe. Could they have changed? Could they see her for who she was now, and not just the broken person they had once left behind? But as the day drew closer, those doubts faded. The truth had become clear. This wasn't about reconnecting or healing old wounds. This was about them trying to reclaim something they had no right to her success. The restaurant was upscale, one of those places with high ceilings and low lighting, where the silverware gleamed and the waiters seemed to glide across the floor. Eva had chosen a quiet corner table, just far enough away from the rest of the diners to give herself space, but close enough that she could see them as soon as they arrived. She had chosen this place not because it was convenient, but because it was neutral ground, a place where there would be no pretense of familiarity. She wasn't there to open old wounds. She was there to close a chapter of her life that had been left open for far too long. When Mark and Chloe walked in, they were exactly as she expected. Mark in his shiny suit, trying too hard to look like a man who had it all together, and Chloe dressed in the latest fashion, scanning the room with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years trying to fit in. Their smiles were wide, fake, and forced. They rushed forward to hug her, but the embrace felt hollow. Mark's "It's so good to see you," and Chloe's "You look amazing," seemed rehearsed, too well practiced. There was no real warmth in their voices, no real curiosity in their eyes. They sat down, the conversation starting out with typical pleasantries. They talked about their lives, as they always had, but the subtext was clear. Mark couldn't help but talk about the promotion he had recently received, how his sales numbers were through the roof, how he was working on a new project that was going to take him to the next level. Chloe, for her part, flitted around the topic of her social media collaborations and the small boutique she was planning to launch. There was no mention of Eva's accomplishments, no acknowledgement of the fact that she had built an entire company from the ground up. They were still operating under the assumption that she was just their little sister, the one who had always been in the background, waiting to be acknowledged when it was convenient for them. Eva listened in silence, letting them talk, letting them spin their version of the story, their narrative of how they had always supported her from the sidelines. She let them believe that they could erase the years of neglect and manipulation with a few nice words, with their praise for her success that was suddenly so easy to give. She didn't interrupt, she didn't argue, she let them talk, and when the time was right, she would speak. After a while, the conversation inevitably turned to business, and that's when Mark finally got to the point. "So Eva," he began, leaning forward, his tone dropping to a more serious note. "We've been thinking about it a lot, and Chloe and we've got this amazing idea. You've done great with Phoenix, really. We're so proud of you, sis. But, starting a business is tough, and we were thinking maybe we could partner up." His words were slick, rehearsed, but the intent was clear. This wasn't about family or reconciliation. This was about them trying to insert themselves into her success, trying to grab a piece of the life she had built on her own with no help from them. Chloe chimed in right after, her voice eager. "Yeah, we've got some great ideas. I've been working on some designs for this boutique I want to open, and Mark's got a ton of connections in the sales world. We could really make something of it if we just had a little push, and Phoenix could be the perfect platform to tie it all together." Her eyes were wide with excitement, but there was no real substance behind her words. It was all about the opportunity to benefit from Eva's hard work, to latch onto her success now that it was valuable. It was about them stepping into her world without ever having been a part of it. Eva's heart was heavy, but her mind was clear. She had known this was coming, had known that their reappearance wasn't about love or reconciliation, but about something much darker: manipulation. They wanted to claim a piece of her success, to rewrite the narrative that they had abandoned. And now, when her hard work had paid off, they wanted to step in and take credit for something they had never helped build. They wanted to rewrite the story, to make it look like they had always been there, so that they had always supported her. The anger, the frustration, the years of neglect, all of it bubbled to the surface. She wasn't angry at them for being opportunistic. They had always been this way. What angered her was how they had treated her for so long, how they had never seen her for who she truly was, how they had only seen her as a stepping stone, a placeholder in their own lives. Eva finally spoke, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching. "You really think this is about you, don't you?" she said, her words cutting through the air like a knife. "You think that after everything, after years of silence, after the way you left me to rebuild my life alone, that I would just let you waltz in and take what you think you deserve? You've been gone for years. And now that I've built something, now that I've made something of myself, you want to come back in and claim it as your own? Is that it?" Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Eva held up a hand, silencing him. "No," she said, her voice growing colder. "You don't get to rewrite this story. You don't get to come in and act like you've been here all along. You've been absent, both physically and emotionally, and now that you see what I've built, you want to capitalize on it. You want to take credit for something you had no part in. But here's the truth. Mark, her voice softened just slightly. You don't get to take credit for my success. This isn't for you. This is for me. I built Phoenix. I built my life. And I don't need anyone's approval, especially not yours. Chloe's eyes were wide, her lips trembling with what seemed like a mixture of guilt and disbelief. Ava, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're being dramatic. We're just trying to help you. We're your family. Ava looked at her sister, and for the first time in years, she clearly saw the manipulative nature of her attempts to fit into Ava's life now that it was successful. No, Ava said, her voice firm. You're not trying to help me. You're trying to use me. You've been using me for years, and I've had enough. She paused, letting the words hang in the air before she continued. I forgive you both, but that doesn't mean I need you in my life anymore. You made your choices. You abandoned me when I needed you most. And now that I've built something without you, you think you can just walk back in like nothing happened? Eva stood up, her decision final. The door is closed, and it's staying closed. She turned to leave, but then, in the quiet of the moment, she paused. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way forever. I'll never allow toxic people back into my life, no matter who they are. I've learned that the hard way. With that, she walked away, leaving Mark and Chloe behind in the restaurant, their faces a mixture of confusion and regret. Eva had finally taken control of her life, and in doing so, she had closed the door on a past that no longer served her. She was moving forward, and she wasn't looking back. Eva leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Her journey had been long, painful, and at times nearly impossible. But as she reflected on everything she had overcome, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. What started as a broken life, shattered by betrayal and neglect, had become something so much more. She had built Phoenix from the ground up, created something that not only had purpose, but was making a difference in people's lives. And, more importantly, she had found herself along the way stronger, more determined, and unapologetically empowered. She had once defined herself by the people around her, their opinions, their judgments, their neglect. But now, she defined herself by her actions, the way she rose, despite the odds, the way she had learned to trust her own strength and vision. Eva realized that true empowerment came from within, from realizing that no matter what had happened to her, she was still capable of rising. And she had done just that step by step, from the ashes of her past. Looking at the life she had created, Ava thought about her journey. It wasn't just about building a successful business. It was about finding the courage to move past the pain, to leave behind the toxic relationships that tried to keep her small, and to walk a new path, one that was hers and hers alone. She had made the hard choice to close the door on the people who had abandoned her, to stop seeking validation from those who couldn't see her worth. And in doing so, she had freed herself. She couldn't help but wonder how many of us hold on to people or situations that no longer serve us. How often do we let the opinions of others define our path? Eva realized that sometimes the hardest part wasn't the journey forward, it was the courage to let go of what no longer fits into our story. Sometimes, closing a door is the most empowering choice we can make. If you've ever found yourself in a similar situation, Eva's story might hit close to home. Ask yourself, are there people or circumstances holding you back from becoming the person you're meant to be? How long will you let your past define your future? It's time to take control of your story, just like Eva did. And if you found inspiration in her journey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience, empowerment, and strength. Because when you start choosing yourself, incredible things start to happen. Eva's journey didn't end with success, it ended with her finally believing she was worthy of it. Eva had closed a door she didn't need to open again. And as she looked ahead, she knew that her future, her life, was hers to create. The possibilities were endless, and for the first time, she was ready to step fully into them.